The dust cloud appeared on the horizon like a warning, but for Henrietta Neville, it signaled something worse than a coming storm. Blood trickled down her temple as she stumbled along the barren trail outside Dallas, Texas, clutching a small leather-bound journal to her chest, the evidence of her supposed crime. Loving the wrong man, the son of Dallas's most powerful cattle baron, had earned her a beating and banishment from the only home she'd ever known. The year was 1875, and in this unforgiving land, a woman alone might as well be dead. Miles Kincaid spotted the figure from half a mile away, a splash of faded blue fabric against the golden-brown landscape. He'd been trailing a herd of mustangs since dawn, but something about the uneven gait of what he now recognized as a woman made him abandon his pursuit. Pulling his bay stallion to a stop, he adjusted his worn leather hat against the relentless Texas sun and squinted. Most folks knew better than to wander these parts alone. As he approached, he saw the woman stumble and fall to her knees. Cursing under his breath, Miles spurred his horse forward, closing the distance quickly. The woman's face was streaked with dirt and blood, her chestnut hair falling loose from what had once been a proper arrangement. Her dress, though quality material, was torn at the shoulder and stained with dust and sweat. "Madam," he called, dismounting in a fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle, "you're a far piece from anywhere safe." Henrietta flinched at the sound of his voice, her green eyes wide with fear as she struggled to stand. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst, "I mean no trouble." Miles approached slowly, hands visible, the way he might with a spooked horse. "I don't reckon you're the one causing trouble." His eyes narrowed at the bruise forming along her jawline. "Seems trouble found you just fine." "They'll be looking for me," she said, swaying slightly. "Samuel Blackwell's father doesn't take kindly to women who refuse their place." Miles's jaw tightened at the name. Old Man Blackwell and his entitled son were well known throughout the county, wealthy, powerful, and cruel to anyone who stood in their way. "What's your name?" he asked, offering his canteen. "Henrietta Neville," she replied, accepting the water with trembling hands. "Most called me Henry." "Well, Miss Neville," Miles said, glancing back toward town, "I'm Miles Kincaid, and I reckon you deserved better from the start." The simple words spoken with such conviction nearly broke her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. She'd cried enough. "My ranch is about 2 hours' ride from here," Miles continued, gesturing to his horse. "It's not much, but you'll be safe there while we figure out what's next. Why would you help me?" Henrietta asked, suspicion edging her voice. "You don't know me." Miles's blue eyes met hers, steady and clear. "I know enough about Blackwell to understand anyone running from him probably has good reason." He paused. "And my ma raised me better than to leave a woman alone in the desert." After a moment's hesitation, Henrietta nodded. Miles helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. As they rode away from Dallas, Henrietta clutched her journal tighter. Inside were her poems, her dreams, and the letters Samuel had written before revealing his true nature, before his father had discovered their correspondence, and decided an orphaned schoolteacher wasn't worthy of his son. The Kincaid Ranch appeared as the sun began its descent, a modest spread compared to the Blackwell empire but neatly kept. A small 2-story house stood proudly amid a cluster of outbuildings, with corrals holding several fine horses. An older woman emerged from the house as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "Miles Kincaid, you bring trouble home like most men bring gifts," she called out, her tone more resigned than angry. "This is Henrietta Neville," Miles explained as he helped her down. "Miss Neville, this is Esther Davis, my housekeeper and the woman who's kept me alive since I was knee-high to a grasshopper." Esther's weathered face softened as she took in Henrietta's condition. "Land's sakes, child, come inside before you fall down." The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and clean floors. Esther led Henrietta to a bedroom upstairs while Miles went to see to his horse. "You're safe here," Esther assured her, placing a basin of warm water and a clean cloth beside the bed. Miles don't take to cruelty, especially against women. I shouldn't stay, Henrietta whispered, though the thought of leaving the sanctuary she'd found made her stomach clench. The Blackwells won't stop looking, Esther snorted. That family's reach is long, but even they don't own every inch of Texas. She pressed a gentle hand to Henrietta's shoulder. Rest now. Tomorrow's troubles will keep till morning. Left alone, Henrietta washed away the dust and blood, wincing as the cloth touched her injuries. She changed into a simple cotton nightgown Esther had provided and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to truly feel the weight of what had happened: her dismissal from the schoolhouse, the public humiliation, the beating from Blackwell's men when she'd refused to sign a statement claiming she'd tried to seduce Samuel for his money. She opened her journal, reading the poems she'd written about love and freedom, naive words from a woman who hadn't understood the price of either. Samuel had seemed so different from his father at first, appreciating her mind, encouraging her writing. But when his father had discovered their relationship and threatened to disinherit him, Samuel had quickly disavowed her, claiming she'd manipulated him. A knock at the door startled her from her memories. Miles stood in the doorway, holding a tray with a bowl of stew and a piece of cornbread. "Esther insisted you eat," he said, placing the tray on a small table. "Said you looked half-starved." Henrietta hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma of the stew reached her. "Thank you," she said, closing her journal. "For everything?" Miles nodded, lingering in the doorway. "Those bruises," he began, his voice low. "Blackwell's men?" "Yes," she answered simply. "I wouldn't sign a statement saying I'd tried to extort money from Samuel. It would have ruined what little reputation I had left." "And what reputation is that?" Henrietta's chin lifted slightly. "I was the schoolteacher in Dallas for 3 years. Before that, I worked in a bookshop in Fort Worth after my parents died." Miles leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "Teaching suits you, I'd wager." "It did," she replied, a flash of anger sparking in her eyes. "Until Samuel's father convinced the school board I was morally unfit to teach their children because I dared to believe his son's promises." "What promises were those?" Miles asked, his tone careful. Henrietta laughed bitterly. "That he loved me, that he wanted to marry me. That we would build a life where I could continue teaching and writing my poetry." She shook her head. "Foolish dreams." "Not foolish," Miles countered, "just trusted to the wrong man." Their eyes met, and Henrietta felt a strange connection to this quiet cowboy with his direct gaze and simple honesty. "You should eat and rest," Miles said finally. "We can talk more tomorrow about what you want to do next." "What I want." Henrietta repeated softly after he'd gone, the words strange on her tongue. No one had asked what she wanted in a very long time. The next morning, Henrietta woke to the sounds of the ranch coming to life: horses nickering, men calling to one another, the rhythmic chopping of wood. She dressed in the clothes Esther had left for her, a simple skirt and blouse that were slightly large but clean and whole. When she made her way downstairs, she found Miles at the kitchen table, studying a map spread before him. He looked up at her entrance, his eyes briefly widening as he took in her appearance. With her face washed clean and her hair neatly braided, the bruises stood out starkly against her fair skin. "Good morning," she said, self-consciously touching her face. "Morning," he replied, standing. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Henrietta answered honestly. "Though I know I need to make plans, I can't impose on your hospitality indefinitely." Miles gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, have some breakfast, and we'll talk." Esther bustled in with a plate of eggs and bacon, fussing over Henrietta until she began to eat. Once the older woman had left them alone, Miles leaned forward. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said. "Blackwell's influence reaches far, but not everywhere. I have connections in a town called Promise Creek, about 100 miles north. They need a teacher." Henrietta's heart leapt at the possibility, but caution tempered her hope. "I have no references now, not after what happened in Dallas." You have me, Miles said simply. My word carries weight with the right people. Why would you do this? She asked, studying his face for any hint of ulterior motive. You owe me nothing. Miles was quiet for a moment, his gaze dropping to his calloused hands. 6 years ago, my sister found herself in a similar situation. Man who claimed to love her showed his true colors when she wouldn't do as he said. His jaw tightened. No one helped her. She died trying to make it on her own. Understanding dawned on Henrietta. I'm sorry, she whispered. I couldn't help her, Miles continued, but I can help you. If you'll let me. Before Henrietta could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Miles was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. 4 riders, he said, his voice tense. One of them Samuel Blackwell. Henrietta's blood ran cold. How did they find me so quickly? Doesn't matter, Miles replied, reaching for his gun belt hanging by the door. Go upstairs with Esther, I'll handle this. No, Henrietta said firmly, standing. I won't hide while you face them on my account. Miles looked like he wanted to argue but instead nodded. Stay inside then. Let me do the talking. He stepped out onto the porch as the riders approached, his stance relaxed but alert. Henrietta watched through the window as Samuel Blackwell dismounted, his expensive clothes and arrogant bearing marking him as clearly as a brand. Kincaid, Samuel called, adjusting his leather gloves. I understand you found something that belongs to me. Nothing here belongs to you, Blackwell, Miles replied evenly. State your business and be on your way. Samuel's handsome face twisted into a sneer. The woman, Kincaid. Henrietta Neville. My father's men saw you riding with her yesterday. Miss Neville is under my protection, Miles said, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. And she belongs to no one but herself. That woman tried to trap me, Samuel spat. She's a manipulative liar who thought she could rise above her station by seducing me. Unable to listen to any more, Henrietta pushed open the door and stepped onto the porch, ignoring Miles's warning glance. The only liar here is you, Samuel, she said clearly. I have your letters. Every promise, every declaration of love. Would you like me to read them to your friends? Samuel's face paled slightly. You wouldn't dare. I have nothing left to lose, Henrietta replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You and your father saw to that. One of the men with Samuel, a hired gun by the look of him, shifted in his saddle. We ain't got time for this, Blackwell. Your pa said to bring her back or make sure she ain't talking. Miles stepped forward, placing himself between Henrietta and the riders. You're trespassing on my land, gentlemen. I suggest you leave while that's your only offense. Samuel's eyes narrowed. This isn't over, Kincaid. That woman has property that belongs to me. The only property I have of yours is your letters, Henrietta called. And I'll burn them if you leave us in peace. For a moment, the tension hung in the air like the promise of a storm. Then Samuel gave a curt nod. Burn them. But know this, you'll never teach again in Texas. My father will see to that. With that, he turned his horse and rode away, his men following closely. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Miles relax his stance. You shouldn't have confronted him, he said, turning to Henrietta. I couldn't let you face them alone, she replied. Not when I'm the cause of their being here. Miles studied her face, noting the determination in her eyes despite the fear he could see beneath. You're braver than you give yourself credit for, Miss Neville. Henry, she corrected him. If we're to be friends, you should call me Henry. A small smile touched his lips. Henry then. That evening, after dinner, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. The vastness of the Texas landscape stretched before them, a reminder of how small their troubles were in the grand scheme of things. Did you mean what you said about helping me find a teaching position? Henrietta asked, breaking the comfortable silence. I did, Miles confirmed. Though I think we should wait a few weeks before traveling. Let the Blackwells believe you've gone elsewhere. Henrietta nodded, considering his words. I have some money saved, she offered. I can pay you for room and board until then. Miles shook his head. Keep your money. You'll need it for your fresh start. I can't simply take charity, she insisted. Perhaps I could help around the ranch. I'm not afraid of hard work. Miles smiled at her determination. There's always work to be done here. Esther would welcome the help, I'm sure. As the days passed, Henrietta found her place on the ranch. She helped Esther with the cooking and mending, organized Miles's chaotic bookkeeping, and even began teaching reading to two of the ranch hands who had never had the opportunity to learn. The physical signs of her ordeal faded, but the wariness in her eyes remained whenever riders approached or when talk turned to Dallas. Miles found himself increasingly drawn to her quiet strength and sharp intelligence. He'd notice her sitting under a tree reading in the evenings or writing in her journal and find excuses to join her. Their conversations ranged from books they'd both read to dreams they'd harbored his of building his modest ranch into something that could sustain generations. Hers of opening a school where girls could learn more than just household management. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Miles found Henrietta in his small library, a book of poetry open on her lap. Tennyson, he noted, recognizing the volume. My mother's favorite. Henrietta looked up, surprised. You've read him. Miles leaned against the doorframe, an amused expression crossing his face. Contrary to appearances, I'm not completely uncultured. My mother was an educated woman who insisted I be the same. I didn't mean, Henrietta began, flustered. I know, Miles assured her. Most folks look at me and see only the cowboy, not the man who reads Shakespeare by lamplight. Henrietta smiled, relaxing. Most folks look at me and see only a schoolteacher, not a woman who dreams of writing poetry that matters. Is that what you write in your journal? Miles asked, nodding toward the leather-bound book that was never far from her reach. Yes, she admitted, though I fear it's not very good. I'd like to hear some, Miles said, settling into the chair opposite her, if you're willing to share. Henrietta hesitated, then opened her journal to a marked page. This one I wrote last week, she said, then began to read. The poem spoke of freedom found in unexpected places, of strength discovered through breaking. As her voice filled the room, Miles watched her face, the way her eyes brightened with passion, how her hands moved slightly with the rhythm of her words. When she finished, a silence settled between them, comfortable and charged at once. That's beautiful, Miles said finally. Truly. Henrietta's cheeks flushed with pleasure. Thank you. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Miles felt something shift between them, a recognition that their connection had deepened beyond rescuer and rescued. The sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the moment. Miles was instantly alert, moving to the window. Stay here, he instructed, reaching for his gun belt. Is it the Blackwells? Henrietta asked, her face paling. No, Miles replied, relaxing slightly. It's Dan Morris, my foreman, but he's riding hard. Something's wrong. Miles met Dan in the yard, where the dust had barely settled around his lathered horse. Rustlers hit the north pasture, Dan reported breathlessly. Took most of the new stock. Boyd and Jenkins are tracking them, but they're headed toward the cross timbers. Miles cursed under his breath. The dense woodland area would make tracking nearly impossible. How many men? At least 6, maybe more, Dan replied. Professional job, Miles nodded grimly. Get the men together. I'll join you in 10 minutes. He turned to find Henrietta standing on the porch, concern etched on her face. Rustlers, he explained briefly. I have to go. Of course, she said, though worry clouded her eyes. Be careful. Miles took her hand impulsively, his calloused thumb brushing over her knuckles. I'll be back by morning. Stay close to the house. With that, he mounted his freshly saddled horse and led his men out, the urgency of the situation temporarily overshadowing the moment they'd shared. Henrietta watched them go, an unfamiliar fear gripping her heart. In the short time she'd known Miles Kincaid, he had become important to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. True to his word, Miles returned the next morning, exhausted but victorious. They'd recovered most of the cattle and captured 2 of the rustlers, who were now in the custody of the sheriff from the neighboring town. Henrietta met him at the porch with a cup of hot coffee, relief evident in her smile. "I'm glad you're safe," she said simply. "Takes more than a few rustlers to keep me down," Miles replied, though his weary smile belied his casual tone. Later that day, after Miles had rested, Henrietta found him in the barn checking his saddle for damage. She approached hesitantly, aware that something had changed between them but unsure how to navigate these new waters. "I've been thinking," she began, "about your offer to help me find a teaching position." Miles looked up, his expression unreadable. "Having second thoughts?" "No," Henrietta said quickly, "but I've realized I'm not ready to leave just yet." She took a deep breath. "The truth is, I feel safe here and useful. I'd like to stay a while longer if that's acceptable." A slow smile spread across Miles's face. "More than acceptable," he said. "This place runs better with you here." It wasn't a declaration of feelings, but something in his tone made Henrietta's heart beat faster. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." As spring gave way to summer, Henrietta's presence on the ranch became a natural part of its rhythm. She took over much of the bookkeeping, organized a small classroom for the children of the ranch hands, and even learned to ride properly, something her position as a town schoolteacher had never required. Miles found himself creating reasons to spend time with her, offering riding lessons, asking her opinion on ranch matters, bringing her wildflowers he claimed Esther needed for the kitchen. They fell into an easy partnership that bridged friendship and something deeper, though neither seemed ready to name it. The threat from the Blackwells faded as weeks passed with no sign of Samuel or his father's men. Occasionally, news would filter in from Dallas about the family's continued influence, but the stories seemed distant now, belonging to another life. On a particularly hot July afternoon, Miles suggested they ride to a nearby creek where the water ran cool beneath the shade of ancient oaks. They packed a simple picnic: bread, cheese, and Esther's apple pie, and set out early to avoid the worst of the day's heat. The creek was as Miles had promised, a sanctuary of cool green in the midst of the summer brown landscape. They tethered their horses in the shade and spread a blanket near the water's edge. "This is beautiful," Henrietta said, removing her hat and letting the breeze cool her face. "How did you find it?" "My father brought me here when I was a boy," Miles explained, settling beside her. "Said it was where he proposed to my mother." Henrietta glanced at him, noting the hint of melancholy that always appeared when he spoke of his parents. "You must miss them terribly," Miles nodded. "Every day, but they left me with something worthwhile: this land, their values." He smiled slightly. "And apparently their taste for poetry." Henrietta laughed, the sound carrying across the water. "A cowboy who quotes Tennyson, what would the other ranchers say?" "That depends on whether I've beaten them at poker recently," Miles replied with a grin. They ate and talked as the day warmed around them, eventually falling into a comfortable silence. Henrietta removed her shoes and stockings to dangle her feet in the cool water, a small rebellion against the propriety that had governed her life for so long. "Samuel never understood why I wrote poetry," she said suddenly, watching the water ripple around her ankles. "He said it was a frivolous pastime that distracted from more important duties." Miles leaned back on his elbows, watching her profile. "And what did you tell him?" "That poetry helps me make sense of the world," she replied. "It gives shape to feelings that might otherwise overwhelm me." She glanced at Miles. He laughed. "He was a fool," Miles said simply. Henrietta studied his face, the earnestness in his blue eyes. "No one has ever defended me the way you have," she said softly, "or treated me as though my thoughts matter." "They do matter," Miles said, sitting up. "You matter, Henry." The air between them seemed to still, heavy with unspoken feelings. Miles reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingertips lingered against her cheek, warm and calloused. "Miles," she whispered, her heart racing. He leaned forward, his intent clear, and Henrietta closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When she responded, her hands moving to his shoulders, the kiss deepened, becoming a conversation about everything they'd left unsaid. When they finally broke apart, Miles rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" she asked, her fingers still curled in the fabric of his shirt. "I didn't want you to think I expected anything in return for helping you," he explained. "And I wasn't sure if you were ready after what happened with Blackwell." Henrietta pulled back slightly to meet his gaze. "Samuel never made me feel the way you do," she said honestly, "like I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be." Miles kissed her again, and Henrietta felt as though something long broken inside her was finally beginning to heal. The ride back to the ranch was filled with stolen glances and brushing hands, the newness of their acknowledged feelings creating a private world around them. But as they approached the ranch, they saw an unfamiliar carriage in the yard, its sleek black finish and matched pair of horses speaking of wealth and status. Miles's expression darkened as he recognized the Blackwell crest on the carriage door. "Stay behind me," he instructed, his voice tense. They dismounted at a distance, and Miles made sure his pistol was accessible before leading the way to the house. On the porch stood an older man with Samuel's features, but harder eyes, Jonathan Blackwell himself, the cattle baron whose word was law in much of North Texas. "Kincaid," the man called, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I see my timing is impeccable." "What do you want, Blackwell?" Miles asked, keeping Henrietta partially shielded behind him. "A moment of Miss Neville's time," Blackwell replied, his gaze shifting to her. "Without interference. Anything you have to say to her can be said in front of me," Miles stated firmly, Blackwell's mouth thinned with impatience. "Very well." He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "Miss Neville, I've come to offer you a proposition." Henrietta stepped forward, her chin raised despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I'm not interested in anything you have to offer, Mr. Blackwell." $5,000, Blackwell said flatly, holding out the envelope. "In exchange for your permanent departure from Texas and your silence regarding my son." Miles's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but Henrietta placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Why now?" she asked. "It's been months since I left Dallas." Blackwell's expression soured. "My son is engaged to Margaret Thornton, daughter of Judge Thornton. The wedding is in October. I cannot risk your reappearance or any unpleasantness. So you'd rather pay me off than risk your son facing consequences for his actions," Henrietta summarized, anger replacing her fear. "I'm offering you a new start," Blackwell countered. "More money than a schoolteacher would earn in 10 years. Take it and go to California, Oregon, anywhere but here." "And if I refuse?" Henrietta challenged, Blackwell's eyes hardened. "Then I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure you have no future in Texas or anywhere within my considerable reach." Miles stepped forward, his voice dangerously calm. "You're threatening her on my land. That's a mistake you don't want to make." Blackwell assessed Miles with cold calculation. "Your ranch is mortgaged to the Dallas Mercantile Bank, is it not? A bank whose principal investor is myself." Miles stiffened but didn't back down. "Threaten me all you want, Blackwell, but you leave her alone." "I see," Blackwell said, his gaze moving between them. "It seems history repeats itself, another Kincaid besotted with someone beneath their station." "What's that supposed to mean?" Miles demanded. "Ask your mother," Blackwell replied with a cruel smile. "Oh wait, you can't. She died in disgrace after your father threw away everything for her." Miles lunged forward, but Henrietta caught his arm. "Miles, don't," she pleaded. "It's what he wants." Blackwell placed the envelope on the porch railing. "My offer stands until the end of the week. After that, you'll find Texas a most inhospitable place for both of you." With that, he turned and strode back to his waiting carriage. They watched in silence as the carriage disappeared down the road, the dust settling in its wake. Miles's face was a mask of contained fury, his hands clenched at his sides. "What did he mean about your mother?" Henrietta asked gently. Miles was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. My mother was a schoolteacher in San Antonio. My father was from a wealthy ranching family. They disowned him when he married her. He looked at Henrietta, his eyes haunted. Blackwell's family and mine were rivals. When my father died, Blackwell bought up most of his debts, thinking he could force my mother off the land. But he couldn't, Henrietta guessed. No, Miles agreed with a hint of pride. She worked herself to death keeping this place instead. I was 15 when she died. He picked up the envelope, his expression grim, and now Blackwell's using the same tactics again. I won't take his money, Henrietta declared. I won't be bought. Miles studied her face, his anger softening. You realize what you're refusing. It's enough to start over anywhere you choose. And spend my life looking over my shoulder. Henrietta shook her head. No. Besides, I've already found where I want to be. She took his hand. If you'll have me. Miles pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she might disappear. I've wanted you from the moment I found you on that dusty road, he admitted, but Blackwell won't stop. He'll call in my loans, pressure the merchants to refuse my business whatever it takes. Then we'll face him together, Henrietta said firmly. I won't run again, not from him, not from us. That night they sat at the kitchen table with Esther and Dan discussing their options. The situation was grim. Blackwell's influence extended throughout most of North Texas, and his vendetta against the Kincaid family clearly went beyond his son's involvement with Henrietta. We could sell half the herd, Dan suggested. Pay down the mortgage enough that Blackwell can't call it in. At current prices, that wouldn't come close to covering it, Miles replied, studying the ledger before him, and we'd lose our breeding stock. Esther, who had been unusually quiet, cleared her throat. There might be another way, she said. Your mother's brother in Kansas City. The one who offered to help after your father died. Miles frowned. Uncle James, mother refused his money, said she wouldn't take charity. It wouldn't be charity now, Esther pointed out. It would be an investment in his nephew's ranch, and it would get Blackwell off your back. Miles considered this, his pride warring with practicality. I haven't spoken to him in 15 years. Then it's high time you did, Esther declared. Family is family. Later, after the others had gone to bed, Miles and Henrietta sat on the porch swing, the night air cool around them. The enormity of their situation weighed heavily, but beneath it ran a current of determination. I'll write to my uncle tomorrow, Miles said, breaking the silence. But even if he helps with the mortgage, Blackwell won't stop, not as long as we're together. Henrietta leaned her head against his shoulder. I've been thinking about that. What if we gave him what he wants, just not the way he expects? Miles looked at her questioningly. He wants me gone before his son's wedding in October, Henrietta explained. If I were Miles Kincaid's wife instead of Henrietta Neville, I'd no longer be the woman from Samuel's past. I'd be someone new. Miles stared at her, his heart hammering in his chest. Are you proposing to me, Henrietta Neville? A smile curved her lips. I believe I am, Miles Kincaid. Miles took her face in his hands, his expression serious despite the joy blooming in his chest. I want to marry you more than anything in this world, he said. But not just to thwart Blackwell. I love you, Henry. I think I've loved you since I found you on that road. And I love you, she whispered back. Not because you saved me, but because you really saw me when no one else did. Their kiss sealed a promise that went beyond strategy or defiance. It was a declaration that what they'd found together was worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. The following weeks were a flurry of activity. Miles's Uncle James responded to his letter with enthusiasm, offering not only to pay off the mortgage, but to invest in expanding the ranch's operations. It seemed that he had been waiting for years for his stubborn nephew to reach out, and he was eager to repair the family connection. Meanwhile, preparations for a September wedding began. Esther took charge of transforming the ranch house, while Dan organized the men to build a proper dance floor beneath the old oak trees. News of the upcoming nuptials spread quickly through the surrounding ranches, and despite Blackwell's influence, many neighbors pledged to attend some out of friendship. others out of curiosity, and a few simply to witness the culmination of what had become a well-known act of defiance. Henrietta threw herself into creating a home with Miles, discovering a newfound joy in planning their future together. In the evenings, they would sit side by side on the porch, talking about everything from the day's work to their hopes for children someday. The more they shared, the deeper their connection grew, transforming what might have begun as rescue and gratitude into a partnership of equals. A week before the wedding, Miles returned from town with a letter bearing the Dallas postmark. He found Henrietta in the garden, helping Esther harvest late summer vegetables. "This came for you," he said, handing her the envelope. Henrietta recognized Samuel's handwriting immediately, and her stomach tightened. She opened it with hesitant fingers, aware of Miles's concerned gaze. The letter was brief, a stilted apology for his treatment of her, an explanation that his father had threatened to disown him, and congratulations on her upcoming marriage. It concluded with a request that she destroy his previous letters, as exposure would ruin his engagement to Margaret. "He's still a coward," Henrietta said after sharing the contents with Miles, apologizing only when it's safe to do so and still worried about protecting himself. Miles studied her face. "Does it bother you, knowing he's getting the life he wanted while he cast you aside?" Henrietta considered this, searching her heart. "No," she realized with some surprise, "because I found something better than what I thought I wanted. I found what I needed." That evening, Henrietta took out the bundle of Samuel's letters, the ones she'd once treasured as proof of love. With Miles beside her, she fed them one by one into the fireplace, watching as the flames consumed the paper and with it, the last vestiges of her former life. "I wish I could have known you then," Miles said as they watched the fire. "Before any of this happened," Henrietta shook her head. "I wasn't the woman I am now. Samuel and his father, what they did was cruel, but it led me here to you." She took his hand. "I wouldn't change that, even if I could." Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, the September sky a perfect blue. The ranch was transformed, with wildflowers and ribbons adorning the fence posts and porch railings. Neighbors and friends arrived throughout the morning, bringing food and gifts and filling the air with congratulations and good wishes. Henrietta prepared in the upstairs bedroom, helped by Esther and the wives of several ranch hands. Her dress was simple but elegant cream-colored cotton with lace trim that Esther had saved from her own wedding gown. Her chestnut hair was arranged with sprigs of lavender, and around her neck hung a small gold locket, a wedding gift from Miles that contained a tiny scrap of paper with the first poem she'd ever read to him. When the time came, she descended the stairs to find the house empty, everyone having gathered in the yard beneath the oak trees. Through the open door, she could see Miles waiting for her, handsome in a new black suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. Taking a deep breath, Henrietta stepped out onto the porch. The assembled guests turned to watch her approach, but she saw only Miles, his face lighting up as their eyes met. Each step brought her closer to the future they would build together, away from the shadows of the past. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, with the local pastor officiating. Miles and Henrietta had written their own vows, promises not only of love and fidelity but of partnership and respect. When Miles kissed her as his wife for the first time, the cheers of their friends seemed to reach all the way to Dallas. The celebration continued well into the evening, with dancing and feasting and stories shared around bonfires as the stars emerged overhead. It was nearing midnight when a late arrival caused a stir. Jonathan Blackwell himself, accompanied by two of his men. A hush fell over the gathering as he approached Miles and Henrietta, his expression unreadable. "Mr. and Mrs. Kincaid," he said, inclining his head slightly. "I see you've made your choice." "We have," Miles confirmed, his arm protective around Henrietta's waist. Blackwell studied them for a moment. "My son's wedding is in 3 weeks," he said. "I trust this matter is now concluded between our families." "It is," Henrietta replied firmly. though not in the way you intended." A hint of grudging respect flickered in Blackwell's eyes. "Perhaps not." He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope similar to the one he'd offered before. "Consider this a wedding gift, payment of a different kind." Miles took the envelope cautiously. Inside was a deed transferring ownership of the additional 500 acres adjoining the Kincaid Ranch from Blackwell Holdings to Miles and Henrietta Kincaid. "Why?" Miles asked, suspicion evident in his voice. "Let's call it restitution," Blackwell replied, "for past wrongs against your family. And insurance against future misunderstandings." With that, he turned and left as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving Miles and Henrietta to wonder at this unexpected development. "Do you trust him?" Henrietta asked quietly. Miles shook his head. "Not entirely. But this land, it's what my father always wanted, what my mother fought to keep." He looked at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "And now it's ours to build on." Henrietta leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him against her. "Together," she whispered. "Together," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. As the seasons changed, the Kincaid Ranch prospered. With Uncle James's investment and the additional land, they expanded their cattle operation and built a new barn. Henrietta started a proper school in what had been the bunkhouse, teaching the children from the ranch and neighboring farms. In the evenings, she continued writing her poetry, encouraged by Miles's unwavering support. The following spring brought their first child, a son they named William James Kincaid, after Miles's father and uncle. Henrietta discovered that motherhood, far from limiting her dreams, expanded them in ways she hadn't anticipated. She found herself writing children's stories alongside her poetry, tales of brave girls and kind-hearted cowboys that she promised to publish someday. Word came from Dallas that Samuel and Margaret's marriage was proceeding as expected, producing the alliance between powerful families that Jonathan Blackwell had desired. Occasionally, news would filter through about the elder Blackwell's business dealings, but he seemed to have made peace with the Kincaids, even recommending their cattle to buyers from the eastern states. On the first anniversary of their wedding, Miles took Henrietta back to the creek where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. They spread the same blanket beneath the ancient oaks, now with baby William sleeping peacefully between them. "Happy?" Miles asked, watching her face as she gazed at their son. "More than I knew was possible," Henrietta replied honestly. "You?" Miles reached out to touch her cheek, his eyes filled with the same tenderness she'd first seen when he found her on that dusty road. "You know," he said, "when I told you that you deserved better from the start, I had no idea how much better my life would be with you in it." Henrietta leaned into his touch. "We saved each other," she said simply. As the sun began its descent, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and pink, Miles and Henrietta Kincaid gathered their son and headed home, leaving behind the ghosts of the past and moving toward the future they had fought to create, one built on love, respect, and the courage to stand together against whatever challenges might come. 5 years passed, bringing prosperity to the Kincaid Ranch and 2 more children, a daughter named Elizabeth after Henrietta's mother, and another son they called Thomas. The school Henrietta had started grew into a proper academy with 2 additional teachers, offering education to children from miles around regardless of their family's means. Miles expanded the ranch operations to include horse breeding, developing a line of sturdy, intelligent mounts that quickly gained reputation throughout Texas. Uncle James visited regularly from Kansas City, delighting in his great-nieces and nephews and bringing books for Henrietta's ever-expanding library. On a crisp autumn morning in 1881, Henrietta sat at her desk in the study Miles had built for her, reviewing the proofs for her first published collection of poetry. The Boston publisher had been skeptical at first, poetry from a rancher's wife in Texas. But her work had impressed him enough to take the risk. Miles entered quietly, pausing to watch her work. At 32, Henrietta had grown more beautiful to him with each passing year. The insecure young woman he'd found on the road outside Dallas had blossomed into a confident, passionate partner who challenged him daily and loved him completely. "The children are helping Esther make apple butter," he said, coming to stand behind her chair. "Though I suspect they're eating more apples than they're cutting," Henrietta smiled, leaning back against him. "As long as they're keeping Esther company, she's been missing Dan since he left to deliver those horses to Fort Worth." Miles nodded, his hands resting on her shoulders. "I received a letter today," he said after a moment, "from Jonathan Blackwell." Henrietta turned to face him, surprise evident in her expression. They rarely heard from Blackwell directly these days, though news occasionally reached them through mutual acquaintances. "What does he want?" she asked. "He's retiring," Miles explained. "Moving to San Francisco to live near his daughter. Samuel will take over the business interests here. And he felt we needed to know this because—" Henrietta prompted. Miles handed her the letter. "He's offering to sell us the rest of his land adjoining our property, at a fair price." Henrietta scanned the letter, noting the formal but not unfriendly tone. "It would nearly double our holdings," she observed. "It would," Miles agreed. "And it's good land, water access, grazing fields." He hesitated. "But I wanted to discuss it with you before responding. Our history with the Blackwells is complicated." Henrietta considered this, thinking of how far they'd come from those first uncertain days. The bitterness she'd once felt toward the Blackwell family had faded over time, replaced by a life so rich with love and purpose that the past seemed increasingly distant. "I think," she said carefully, "that accepting his offer would be the final chapter in a story that's already mostly written. A way of truly putting the past behind us." Miles studied her face. "You're sure?" "I am," she confirmed. "Besides, we'll need the extra land when the children are grown, especially if they're anything like their father." Miles laughed, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Or their mother," he countered. "Stubborn, brilliant, and impossible not to love." "Impossible, am I?" she teased, her arms sliding around his neck. "The most wonderfully impossible woman I've ever known," he murmured before kissing her. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children chase fireflies in the yard, Henrietta thought about the twisting path that had led her to this moment. The pain and humiliation she'd suffered in Dallas had seemed like the end of everything once, but it had merely been the beginning of something far greater than she could have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Miles asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "That day you found me," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "When you said I deserved better from the start." Miles nodded, remembering. "I meant it." "I know," Henrietta said softly, "and you gave me better, you gave me everything." She took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the familiar comfort of long partnership. "But what I've realized is that what happened before with Samuel, with being cast out, it wasn't the worst thing that could have happened. It was the best." Miles raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Because it led me to you," she explained. "To our children, to this life we've built, and I wouldn't trade that for anything." Miles pulled her closer, his love for her as strong and steady as the day they'd married. "Nor would I," he whispered against her hair. As the Texas night deepened around them, stars appearing one by one in the vast sky overhead, Miles and Henrietta Kincaid held each other close, secure in the knowledge that what they'd found together through chance, choice, and courage was rarer and more precious than anything they might have had apart. A love born from rescue and defiance had transformed into something enduring and true, proving that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, if only we're brave enough to follow the path before us.